June 1, 2009 in the sky, over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, missing a huge passenger plane. It was a modern Airbus A330, French airline Air France. Flight 4147 from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. There were 228 people on board. The plane just disappeared from the radar in the middle of a dark thunderstorm night, without giving a single distress signal. The creepiest thing in this story was that liner disappeared absolutely without a trace. For several days, search and rescue teams from 6 different countries searched for him in the most dangerous and remote parts of the Atlantic Ocean, but did not find anything. No wreckage or oil stains. Neither those ocean in this place has depth over 4,000 meters. No one could understand what happened, though. Modern, reliable aircraft equipped with the latest technology, with 3 experienced pilots on board, couldn't just fall into the ocean like that. And yet he fell, when after 4 long years, search teams were finally able to lift from the bottom of the Atlantic. Black boxes of this liner, the world has learned the terrifying truth. This plane was doomed not because of faulty equipment, not because of bad weather, and not because of terrorists. He was doomed by one simple human mistake, which 2 pilots committed for 4.5 minutes straight, not understanding what does. Today, we will tell you about this terrible disaster, show how the most advanced airliner in the world fell into the ocean from a height of 11 kilometers in a few minutes, and reveal the main secret. Why this disaster, often called the Titanic of the modern aviation era. That evening, 31-0 in Rio de Janeiro, was warm and humid as usually this time of year. At Galeon International Airport, huge twin-engine Airbus A330 been getting ready for a long 11-hour flight across the Atlantic to the capital of France. This liner had its own name, Ville de Rio de Janeiro. That is the city of Rio de Janeiro. He was relatively new, released in 2005, and counted one of the most reliable passenger aircraft in the world. 216 passengers from all over the world boarded. Among them were tourists, businessmen, diplomats, and ordinary families coming home after vacations. There were also 12 crew members on board. The captain of this flight was a 58-year-old Frenchman named Marc Dubois. This was the most experienced pilot with almost 1,000 flight hours, of which he spent 1,700 hours at the helm, and 330. Besides him, there were 2 more pilots in the cockpit. 37-year-old David Robert was the senior 2 pilot, with approximately 1,000 flight hours, and 32-year-old Pierre Cedric Bonin was a junior 2 pilot. Bonin had significantly less experience, about 2,000 hours of flying time. These 3 pilots together had to fly the plane across the ocean. At 10 p.m. 29 minutes, local Brazilian time, the Airbus came off the runway and headed northeast. The first hours of the flight were completely calm. The plane gained a cruising altitude of 11,000 meters and walked over Brazil, borders with the Atlantic. Passengers in the cabin had dinner and then started getting ready for bed. In the cockpit, the pilots were talking about usual topics and periodically checked the devices. Captain Dubois knew that they have to cross a difficult region in the sky over the equator. This region is called the Intratropical Convergence Zone. This is a special climatic band around the entire equator of our planets where powerful thunderstorms are constantly forming. Warm, humid air from both hemispheres meets there and goes up, forming giant thunderclouds up to 15 kilometers high. Any pilot flying through this zone knows that you need to enter it with extreme caution. Usually experienced captains just fly around the biggest thunderstorms. Side, even if it takes extra fuel and time. Around 1:30 a.m. GMT, the plane has entered this danger zone. It was visible on the radar that a powerful thunderstorm system is forming right along their course. Captain Dubois was in the cockpit at the time, along with both 2 pilots. They discussed the thunderfront ahead surprisingly, but they didn't make the decision to seriously deviate from the route. The plane only turned a little to the left, to go not through the very center of the thunderstorm, and over her edge. Many experts then wondered, why didn't the captain dodge harder? According to experts, he trusted his experience too much and thought that the plane can easily cope with turbulence. And it was at this point that Captain Dubois did that in hindsight many consider one of the key mistakes. This night he told colleagues, "What about to go relax to the special cabin for pilots," which was right behind the cabin. Under airline rules, the captain had the right to sleep during a long night flight. He handed control to 2 pilots. The eldest of them, David Robert, stayed in charge, and the younger Bonin took the helm directly, and the captain went to sleep at exactly that moment, when the plane was approaching the most dangerous point. Whole route. A few minutes after the captain left, the plane began. Enter the densest parts of a thundercloud. First heard the sounds of hail, hitting the fuselage. Passengers in the cabin felt a slight shake. Pilots in the cockpit put on oxygen masks, as expected according to the instructions. In such conditions, Bonan lowered the speed a little bit to recommended turbulence. Outside the plane, at an altitude of 11,000 meters, the air temperature was about 50 degrees C. In these conditions, ice crystals inside a thundercloud. They can behave unpredictably. And it was these ice crystals that started the whole disaster. There are 3 special tubes on the body of the aircraft outside, which are called pitot tubes. These are very important appliances. They measure speed, aircraft relative to the oncoming airflow. With no correct speed readings, the plane actually becomes blind. All other devices and computers on board depends on the data coming from these tubes. So the pit tubes don't freeze. They are equipped with electric heaters. These heaters work almost always during flight. But something very rare happened that night. Ice crystals in a thundercloud turned out to be so large and dense that they totally clogged all 3 pit tubes at the same time. The heaters didn't have time to melt that amount of ice. This happened at exactly 2 hours, 10 minutes, 5 seconds. By Greenwich time, the plane instantly lost flight speed readings. All 3 speed devices in the cockpit showed different, conflicting figures. Car computer automatically disabled autopilot because without speed data, it can't work. A short warning siren sounded. And now live pilots had to manually control a huge liner in a thick cloudiness at an altitude of 11,000 meters. When the news of the disappearance aircraft became public, the world's most incredible theories immediately began. Talked about what happened. The plane was the victim of a terrorist attack. On board, allegedly someone detonated a bomb. Rumors have appeared that the liner was shot down by a secret military missile. Someone claimed there is a special anomalous zone in this part of the Atlantic, similar to the Bermuda Triangle, and that the plane just disappeared in another dimension. The most desperate conspiracy theorists said that liner was abducted by aliens. They were on board. Some important secret documents. Someone wrote that there was a particularly valuable passenger on the plane, which was hunted by special services of different countries. Theories appeared that the computers on board were hacked by hackers who sent the liner straight into the ocean. The truth about this disaster turned out to be much scarier and more instructive than any conspiracy theories. Seconds after autopilot 2 was off, Pilot Bonan in the cockpit did something absolutely incomprehensible. He pulled his side-controlled joystick back on himself. By all the rules and instructions, he shouldn't have done that. When the plane flies at high altitude and loses speed readings, proper pilot action, it's just to hold the plane in a horizontal position and a small nose down. No sudden movements. The plane itself will fly a few minutes by inertia, by tubes. PETA won't thaw and give correct readings again. But Bonan, in stressful situation, did the move opposite of the right one. He started pulling the nose of the plane up. The liner began to rapidly gain altitude. In 1 minute, it went up almost 1,000 meters. That's a harsh and unnatural set. Altitudes for cruising flight. Now researchers are still arguing about why did an experienced pilot perform such a strange action. The most likely explanation is that Bonan just panicked in the dark. Stormy night and lost spatial orientation. Maybe he subconsciously wanted to go higher, to get out of the thundercloud, but when climbing to such a height, the speed of the plane began to fall sharply. And now, the worst thing happened. When the plane goes up too sharply, at some point his speed drops so much that the air stops flowing normally around the wings. This phenomenon is called aerodynamic breakdown, or stalling. When stalling, the plane actually ceases to be an airplane. It turns into a big metal object, which just falls down under the action of gravity. Engines at this point can continue to operate at full capacity, but it doesn't matter anymore. Air does not create lift under the wings. On modern liners, there is a special alert system about the approaching stall inside the cabin. There was a loud mechanical voice in English who repeated the word table, what translates as stalling. That siren sounded over 75 times in the next few minutes. But Bonan just did not hear her. More precisely, he heard the sound. But the brain refused to perceive the information. He kept pulling his joystick back on himself. The plane finally broke into an uncontrolled stall and started falling into the ocean at about 180 kilometers per hour, vertically down. But the nose of the plane was still up. At an angle of about 15 degrees C, the liner was falling tail down like a sheet of paper, and not nose down, like a plane in a regular dive. Pilot Robert, who sat next to Bonin, started to understand that something goes wrong. He asked Bonin to come down. On the flight recorder preserved his words. He repeated "get down" several times. Get down, he shows what. We going up, he shows what we going up. But Bonin, in complete panic, replied weirdly. He said, I no longer control the plane. Robert tried to take control through your own side joystick. And here manifested one of the scariest design features. Aircraft Airbus. On this liner, 2 pilot joysticks are not connected. How to steer on Boeing planes, and separately with the computer. If both pilots enter different commands at the same time, the computer just puts their moves together. That means that when Robert tried to put the plane nose down, and Bonin was pulling the joystick on himself at the same time, the computer wasn't getting a clear command from one of them. These conflicting movements ethically extinguished each other. And the scariest thing was that Robor just didn't see. What is Bonin doing with his joystick? Those joysticks are on the sides of the cockpit, and the pilot, sitting in another chair, physically unable to see his co-workers' movements. Captain Dubois was fast asleep in his rest cabin at this point. Only when Robert called him on speakerphone, he rushed back into the cockpit. On the recording of the flight recorder hit. How did the captain run into the cockpit and immediately ask, what is going on? To this point, the plane was already falling for about 1.5 minutes from a huge height. Altimeter was showing that they were at an altitude of about 1,000 meters, but rapidly lost height. The stall siren kept yelling. Engines were running at full capacity, but the plane did not fly, and Fell Captain tried to understand what was happening. But he did not have time for a full analysis of the situation. He didn't get in one of the pilot seats, because they were busy with other pilots. He just stood behind their backs and tried to give commands. And that's it at this moment. He didn't see the most important problems. He did not understand that Bonin is still pulling the joystick on himself. Bonin acted like a pilot who is waiting for instructions, and that's why no one understood that he himself is the cause of disaster. Time was catastrophically leaving. The plane kept falling at tremendous speed. On board recordings, you can hear the way Robert first shouted, "Gosh, we will crash. This can't be happening." And only at the very last moment, just seconds before hitting the water, Bonin finally said something very important. He shouted to the other pilots, "All this time I was pulling on myself." At this point, Captain and Robert instantly understood the whole picture. The plane was breaking into a stall. Because Junior Pilot, this whole scary minute, kept his nose up, Robert shouted, "Bonina, let go of the joystick," and reached out to his controls, but it was too late. The plane was only a few hundred meters away, above the ocean surface. They had no height left, no time to get the liner out of stall, and make it fly normally again. At 2 hours, 14 minutes, 28 seconds GMT, Airbus A330, and at a speed of about 240 km per hour, nose up, crashed into the black waves of the Atlantic Ocean. All 228 people on board died instantly. The plane literally fell to pieces when hitting the water. Most of the wreckage and bodies of the dead went to the bottom of the ocean, to a depth of almost 4,000 meters. On the morning of 1st June, at international airports across Europe, began to understand. What happened, though? Something very bad. The plane did not communicate at the proper time. It didn't show up on European dispatch services radars. Brazil and France search and rescue teams immediately started a huge operation to find the missing liner. Brazilian military aircraft flew over the alleged area. Disasters many hours in a row, only in a few days. The first debris was seen on the surface of the water, about 1,000 kilometers from the coast of Brazil. Those were life jackets, fragments of the plating, and about 50 bodies of the dead, raised from the surface of the water. But the main proof of that, what happened in the cabin, went with the plane to the bottom. Black boxes, which record pilot talks and flight parameters, were somewhere in the depths of the Atlantic, at a great distance from the shore. Of them, there was no way to understand. Real causes of disaster. Search for flight recorders. Fire. France 447 became one of the most costly and complex operations of this kind in history. For the next 2 years, French, American, and Russian research vessels searched a huge area of the ocean With the help of special underwater robots and sonar, bottom of the ocean in this area was completely mountainous and uneven, which greatly complicated the search. Only in April 2011, almost 2 years after the disaster, search team finally discovered the wreckage of the aircraft at a depth of almost 4,000 millimeters. And a few weeks later managed to raise. Both black boxes are incredible, but they ended up in very good condition and saved all records of negotiations and flight data. Only after that, the world could find out what exactly happened on that terrible thunderstorm night. Record decryption shocked all aviation security specialists. It became clear the plane was completely controlled until the very last moment. His engines were working, his computers worked, his rudders and wings were functioning fine. The plane fell into the ocean solely because of that. That pilots didn't understand. What is he dump? And did not take simple correct actions. Disaster investigation took several years and led to very deep conclusions about modern aviation. The main immediate cause was named pilot error. Bonin, who reacted wrong to autopilot shutdown. But there was a much more serious reason behind this primary systemic phenomenon. The fact is that modern aircraft, so reliable and automated, that passenger liner pilots in most cases, just watching computers work. They fly on autopilot 99% of the entire flight time. Their hand control skills of the plane gradually atrophies when a situation suddenly happens, requires instant correct reaction. They are not ready for her. Bonin in training in Air France never worked out on simulator behavior. Airbus when pit tubes fail at high altitude. This situation just wasn't part of the standard program pilot training of that time. Especially the tragic side of this story, the fate of the passengers and their families. On board, Air France 447 flew people from 30 different countries of the world. Among them were French citizens of Brazil, Germany, Italy, United States, and many other countries. Many passengers were ordinary vacationers who were coming home after a trip to Brazil. Among them were employees of large international companies. For example, on board, 9 managers and engineers of the French company Michelin, returning from a business visit. Also, there were some famous Brazilian musicians, and a group of Italian. The youngest passenger was a 4-year-old child. The oldest was a woman 82 years old. Among the dead were 3 Brazilian Capuchin monks who returned to Europe after a missionary trip. Families of the dead for many years sought justice and accurate explanations of what happened to their loved ones. They organized a special association called Entrée d'Air France Quadrilateral, who represented their interests in court proceedings. In 2019, a French court acquitted the airline, Air France, and manufacturer of aircraft, Airbus, counting that the direct fault of these companies in the disaster was not. But the 7 dead appealed and continue to fight for that, so that the culprits are officially identified. Many of them celebrate every June 1st as a day of remembrance of their loved ones. Search for an airplane at the bottom of the Atlantic became one of the most expensive scientific operations in aviation history. Total cost of search was more than $100,000. The American Institute played a major role in this search. Oceanography called Woods Hole, who specializes in deep-sea research. Scientists of this institute used to search for several underwater autonomous vehicles, which could work at great depths during hours without contact with the surface. These robots gradually combed through huge areas of the ocean floor with the help of special high-precision sonar. When finally, one of these robots found the wreckage of the plane at a depth 4,001 surface, teams of special research vessels began a thorough work on lifting all the important parts, aircraft and bodies of the dead. By the end of all searches, managed to lift from the bottom about 114 dead bodies and 1,000 fragments of the plane, which greatly helped investigators restore the full picture of the disaster. After this disaster throughout the world, civils aviation has undergone huge changes. All airlines were required completely redesigned pilot training programs. Now pilots on simulators regularly work out exactly those situations in which speed devices fail at high altitude. They are taught how to properly come out from aerodynamic stall at any height. Design of pit tubes on all Airbus A330 has been replaced by a new model, which copes much better with icing. Besides, on new passenger aircraft are now installed special system warnings, which definitely show pilots that one of them is pulling the joystick in the wrong direction. After Air France 447, all aircraft manufacturers, they started thinking seriously about how to make cabins more intuitive in critical situations. This disaster also led to a major reassessment of role of automation in aviation. It became clear the smarter computers become, the more important remains good basic pilot training. In case of failure of these computers, Air France 447 is often compared to the Titanic, and not just because that both ships sank in the Atlantic Ocean. The resemblance is much deeper. The Titanic was once considered an unsinkable ship. Miracle of engineering, early 20th century. Airbus A330 in 2000. Derbier Weedcrediawetbert Nen, considered one of the most reliable and automated aircraft in the world. And the one and the other were doomed not because of design flaws, and because of the overestimation of human capabilities. Captain of Titanic was going at too high speed through the iceberg zone. Captain, Air France went to sleep right before a dangerous thunderstorm front. And in both cases, the crew was not prepared for that something could go wrong. This is a very important lesson for our whole civilization. The more technology we create, the smarter our cars become, the more we risk losing the ability to deal with situations when these technologies suddenly fail possible. Mein Lesson Air France 447, not even the technical details of the flight. The main lesson is that a person should never forget their own basic skills and knowledge, no matter how smart the car is, which he manages, because at the most critical moment it may be. What is that smart car just going to refuse? And then your own hands and your own head becomes the final frontier between life and death. 228 people.